The private dining room at Enzo's on Mulberry Street was a museum of old-world power, mahogany wainscoting, leaded glass, and the faint sweet smoke of Toscano cigars. Valentina Val Rossi had worked this room for 3 years, and she knew every shadow. She knew how the light from the crystal chandelier caught the ice in a glass of bourbon. She knew the exact creak of the third floorboard from the kitchen door, and she knew, with the certainty of a woman who had watched men die young, that Don Matteo Bellini was a walking target. He sat at the head of the table tonight, a bull of a man with silver threading through his black hair and the kind of stillness that came from surviving 40 years in the Cosa Nostra. His eyes were the color of wet slate, and they missed nothing. Val poured his espresso with a steady hand, the white of her apron stark against her dark uniform. She was not part of his world. She was the help, invisible, efficient, and paid to forget. But Val had not forgotten her own past. The scar on her left rib, a neat white line from a knife she'd taken for her younger sister in a Phoenix alley. The way her father's hand had felt, heavy and final, the last time he'd backhanded her across the mouth. She had run from that life, changed her name, and landed here, in the belly of the beast, because New York was the only place big enough to swallow a ghost. Tonight the room held 6 men, Don Bellini at the head, his underboss Carmine to his right, 3 capos whose names she never bothered to learn, and a thin, nervous accountant named Petrov, who was sweating through his cheap suit. The deal was Russian guns for Italian shipping routes, an alliance that would make Bellini the undisputed king of the eastern seaboard. Val had heard fragments, whispers through the swinging door, but she did not care. Her shift ended in 40 minutes. She had a date with a pint of gelato and a true crime podcast that made her feel normal. The dinner moved like a funeral procession, slow, deliberate, each course a ritual, osso buco. A Barolo so dark it looked like ink. Don Bellini ate sparingly, pushing food around his plate while his men gorged. Val refilled water glasses, cleared plates, and kept her gaze lowered. But she watched. She always watched. It was the survival instinct her father had beaten into her. See the threat before it sees you. That was why she noticed the change in the room's atmosphere at 9:47 p.m. It was not a sound, not at first. It was a pressure drop, like before a thunderstorm. The air thickened. The chandelier's crystals trembled a fraction, not from a truck outside, but from something subtler. The accountant, Petrov, had stopped breathing. His eyes were fixed on the window behind Don Bellini's left shoulder. The window faced the alley, a narrow channel of darkness that service staff used for smoke breaks. Val followed his gaze. Through the grimy glass she saw nothing but her own reflection, a woman of 29 with a sharp jaw, tired brown eyes, and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile. Then the reflection shifted. A sliver of light from a passing car caught something, a shape hunched and still. A man in a black hoodie pressed against the brick wall of the opposite building. He was not moving, he was aiming. Val's blood turned to ice water. She had heard that sound only once before, in a different life, in a different city. The click of a trigger being drawn back on a semi-automatic pistol. It was a small sound, like a silver raindrop hitting a tin roof. But in the hush of the private dining room, it was a gunshot waiting to happen. The man in the alley had his weapon trained on the window, on Don Bellini's head. The Don's back was turned. His men were laughing at something Carmine had said. They had no idea. Val had 2 seconds, 1 second to decide if this man, this monster who ordered death like takeout, deserved to live. Another second to remember that her brother had been killed by a stray bullet from a similar gun in a similar alley while buying milk for their mother. She hated Bellini. She hated everything he stood for. But she hated that anonymous trigger finger more, because the man in the hoodie was not justice. He was chaos, and chaos had a way of taking innocence along with the guilty. There were busboys in the kitchen, a dishwasher named Miguel who had 3 kids, a pastry chef 5 months pregnant. If that shot went wild, and it would, through glass, through distance, it could tear through the wall into the kitchen. Val had not survived her childhood to watch Miguel bleed out on a tile floor, so she moved, not toward the window, not toward the gun, toward Don Bellini. In the split second between the trigger click and the inevitable blast, she crossed 6 feet of worn Persian carpet. Her serving tray clattered to the floor. Espresso cups shattered into brown shards. She did not scream, she did not warn. She simply threw herself full force, like a linebacker she had never been, into the Don's heavy chair. The chair tipped. Bellini's eyes went wide, genuine surprise, the first she had ever seen on his stone face. They went down together, her body covering his like a shield, her spine curved to take the impact. The bullet came exactly where she had calculated. It punched through the window, leaving a spiderweb cracks, and buried itself in the mahogany headboard of the chair, 2 in above where Bellini's skull had been. The sound was a thunderclap in the small room. Carmine drew his gun. The capos dove under the table. Petrov screamed something in Russian, and Val lay on top of the most dangerous man in New York, her heart hammering against his chest, her breath hot on his neck. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Bellini's hand came up, not to push her away, but to press against the small of her back. His palm was warm and surprisingly gentle. "Stay still, little one," he murmured, his voice a low rumble. "They will not get a second shot." The alley erupted into chaos, shouts, footsteps fleeing, the distant wail of a police siren already too late. Carmine fired 2 rounds into the darkness, more for show than accuracy. Val did not stay still. She rolled off Bellini, her knees scraping against broken china, and crouched behind the overturned table. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. She looked at the Don, who was now sitting up, brushing glass from his jacket. He was not looking at the window. He was looking at her, and in his slate-grey eyes something had shifted. It was not gratitude, it was recognition. He had seen death before, had delivered it personally more times than he could count. But he had never seen anyone, let alone a waitress with a scarred past and a fake name, choose to die for him.